So, Senator, thank you as well as your staff for your enthusiastic participation in this volume. The chapter you, Andrea, and Isabel Sawhill wrote on pregnancy prevention was a terrific contribution to the volume. Andrea, from the influential Power to Decide organization, formerly the Campaign to Prevent Unplanned Pregnancy, is also with us today and will participate in the discussion. I'm going to give you the shortest introduction ever given to a U.S. Senator.
Why?
Because of our limitation of time.
Okay.
Yeah. So you served in the U.S. military for 23 years, including 3 tours in Vietnam as a naval flight officer. You were elected 3 times to serve as Delaware State Treasurer, 5 times to serve in the House of Representatives, twice as governor, and you're now in your 3rd term as a Delaware Senator. Well, I determined that if I added up all the years, that you must have been in public service since shortly after the administration of George Washington. Approximately correct?
From the 3rd grade.
Yeah. All right, Senator, let's begin with this. As someone who has spent many years in public service, how have you relied on data and evidence to guide your decision making?
One of my core values has been find out what works and do more of that. That's it. Find out what works and do more of that.
How do you find out what works?
And if you don't have the data, if you don't have the information, you don't find out what works and document that, then how do we know? What I do is just that. I work with the General Accountability Office. I work with Inspector Generals. I work with OMB. Our Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, we rely on the data. And when I was governor, I got to be chairman of the National Governors Association, and after that, to lead the NGA's Center for Best Practices. And we always were stealing ideas from one another, but also looking to find out what works in a wide range of areas.
Did you notice an increase in a number of high-quality studies that actually tested ideas for solving social problems?
No, here lately, I have not noticed so much focus on actually using good data and good information. There's a lot of fake news and fake numbers as well. Yeah. But if we're going to actually make progress, we got to find the data, drill down on it, and make sure we know what works.
Okay, in your many years of experience in the House and Senate, have you seen an increase, not just yourself, but in your colleagues in the House and the Senate, in their use of data, and especially in evidence-based policy?
It's a mixed bag. In some cases, you have great example, Patty Murray, wonderful senator, Democrat from Washington, and the Speaker of the House, and of them working together in a way that provides a good example for the rest of us. In other cases, we have people just saying whatever they think or whatever they want people to think. So it's a mixed bag.
So what opportunities do you see to stimulate greater use of evidence? One of the purposes of the evidence-based movement is to encourage people, especially elected officials, to look for better data, to finance better data. Do you see that that's a realistic possibility? Would you support that? Do you think your colleagues would?
We had a hearing just this morning in the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs with really focus on governmental affairs. We had in one of the top administration officials from OMB, a very bright woman named Margaret Weichert, and she was presenting a government overhaul that the administration was laying at our feet to consider as not just to do in the next month or even the next year, but something to consider over the next several years. And one of the things that we talked about is the need to not just say, well, who thinks this might work, but to actually understand what's working in the states.
Yeah.
And one of the great examples, I like to say that states are laboratories of democracy. If we're going to try something big, why don't we, rather than just starting government-wide at the federal level, why don't we find out what's worked, whether it's in Delaware or Minnesota or Wyoming or some other state.
Yeah. When I first met you, we were working on welfare reform.
Yes, we were.
Yeah, and you may remember, let's not tell when that was, but...
It was recently.
Recently. You may remember that 41 states were doing exactly the kind of demonstrations you're talking about here and doing high quality, they're called random assignment studies, to figure out what works in welfare reform and how they can encourage mothers on welfare to work. So it's kind of an old story, but then it died down, and we haven't had nearly as much of it lately. So if the government could encourage it more, I think we'd be in very good shape, so I'm glad.
We recently debated in the Senate agriculture policy. Every 5 years or so, we do a big farm bill.
Yeah.
And a big piece of the farm bill, as you know, is nutrition.
Yeah.
And includes what used the SNAP program, which used to be food stamps. But we focused a lot in the welfare reform, and we wanted welfare to pay more than work. We wanted people to be better off when they worked. And one of the nice things when we drilled down on in the Senate on the Farm Bill on nutrition and the SNAP program, we actually looked at what was working for people to work. We don't want to take away. We want to provide disincentives for people to work. But that was actually very encouraging, and it's something that's happened in real time this year.
Unfortunately, it often happens that they don't work well, so then you got to figure out new ways to do it so you can actually make them work, which we hope is the role of the Congress. So Andrea, let me bring you into this. What can we learn from the example of teen pregnancy and more generally women of all ages, pregnancy reduction, from the chapter that you wrote with a senator?
Well, I think one of the things we've learned is exactly what Senator Carper just talked about, which is that states are following the evidence to reduce unplanned pregnancy and improve outcomes for children and families. There is very encouraging evidence coming out of a number of states, Colorado being the first, then also St. Louis, the St. Louis area, and Iowa, about when you reduce barriers to contraception for women and make sure that there's a level playing field so they can pick the most effective contraception based on the evidence, we see really positive outcomes. And governors and other policymakers have seized on that evidence across party lines. We've seen this kind of thing happening now in red states, blue states, purple states, and it's spreading. So I think there is hope that when there is good evidence out there, people do try to follow it. It gets shared through different dissemination channels. Just one example, the now governor of Virginia read about the research from Colorado that showed that their teen birth rate had gone down by half after they implemented a new program to increase access to contraception, and said we should do that in Virginia. He's now governor, and after a couple of attempts, that's now just passed. So we do see these kinds of things spreading, which I think is very encouraging.
You might just mention great things are going on in Delaware as well.
Now, our immediate past governor, Jack Markell, wonderful guy, who was also chairman of the National Governors Association. But we've had a high teen pregnancy rate in Delaware for too long. We focused on, when I was governor, we focused on how do we strengthen the basic building block of our society, families. And it really started and put together a multi-departmental task force for 7 years, or 8 years actually as governor, that focused on how do we strengthen families. And it started with reducing the incidence of unplanned, unwanted pregnancies. We brought in a whole bunch of kids from high schools all over the state, 2 from every public high school, male, female, and from all walks of life to say, this is what we think would work to reduce the incidence of teen pregnancy. A wonderful woman named Marian Wright Edelman once said these, and I'll paraphrase what she said. She said, when a 16-year-old girl becomes pregnant, drops out of school, does not marry the father of her child, and does not go back into school, there's an 80% likelihood that they'll live in poverty. Yep. That same 16-year-old girl does not get pregnant, does not drop out of school, waits till 21 to have a child, marries the father of her child, there's an 8% likelihood that they will live in poverty. 80% on the one hand, 8% on the other hand. That, I've never forgotten that number. Whenever I speak in high schools to assemblies, I ask the kids, high school kids, I say, how many of you want to live in poverty? And you know, there's usually a jokester somewhere that'll always raise their hand and say, oh, I like to live in poverty. Nobody, and all the times, dozens of times I've done this, no one has ever raised a hand one time. Nobody wants to live in poverty. And one of the great predictors of families who are going to live in poverty is what I just explained.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the data are very clear on that.
A part of this story that you go into, and it's very interesting and well put in your article, is about LARCs, long-acting reversible contraception. I think we ought to tell just a little bit of that story because it's so fascinating and it has tremendous potential.
Absolutely. So LARCs, long-acting reversible contraceptives.
Not a new idea.
It's not a new idea, although it's now spreading because we have more data and evidence.
It was a good idea a long time ago that got a very bad development in it, and we finally fixed it, but I think we still have lived with the legacy of that tragedy.
Absolutely. So for those who may not know, LARC include intrauterine devices, or IUDs, or implants that actually go in the arm, and they are highly effective. All the scientific research has shown that they're about 20 times more effective than other methods of birth control.
Like 99% effective?
Exactly, about 99%
Pretty good.
effective.
Compared to what?
Depending on other methods of contraception, 60, 80, 85%. Why they're so effective is that once they are in place, a woman doesn't have to do anything, so they're sort of foolproof.
You don't have to remember to take a pill. You don't have to hope that somebody's going to have a condom
Exactly.
that works.
That's
none
exactly
of that
right.
stuff.
That's exactly right. They're not right for everybody, but what we want to do and what these states and others are doing now is making sure people know how effective they are, how safe they are, how easy to use they are, so that women who want to use them can. And what we've seen in places like Delaware is that when you reduce barriers and make them available to everybody, many women are choosing them. So again, it's having the science and the evidence drive policy and practice. We still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of barriers. And I think one of the things that's really challenging right now is while we have this forward momentum in places like Delaware and Colorado and other places, there's also some real threats to those policies.
There are few areas in social policy where we're making as much progress as we are against teen pregnancy prevention. How did you first get interested? I know you've been involved for a long time. All the way back when you were governor.
Really, when I ran for governor, I was a congressman, ran for governor. Mike Castle was our governor. He was running for Congress. We were trading places, like the movie Trading Places. He won, he became congressman. I won, I became governor. But before we were sworn into our new offices, we were at a dinner together in Wilmington, and the big dinner, a lot of people there. And the fellow who was the MC introduced both of us to speak, and he raised this question. He said, if in your new job, Congressman, Governor, Congressman, soon to be Congressman Castle, soon to be Governor Carper, if you could have a magic wand to start on your new responsibilities, what would you choose? And I said, here's what I'd like. I'd like to walk into my office first day as governor, open the drawer, and pull out a magic wand that would allow me to make sure that every child in my state had at least one loving, caring, nurturing parent, at least one, hopefully two. And two months later, I'm inaugurated governor. I walked into my new office. I opened the drawer. There was no magic wand. But about a month later, one of the cabinet secretaries, one of our new cabinet secretaries, was a holdover from the Castle administration, came in and said, we ought to have a statewide focus for years, multi-year effort on strengthening families. I remember being in a prison about a month or two later after that, where we had a lot of 50 inmates in a room with me and the nation's drug czar. And the nation's drug czar was there, Clinton drug czar, was there to see what we're doing to reduce the incidence of recidivism. And we had like 50 mostly young inmates. And I remember asking these inmates to say, tell the drug czar and me, how did you get here? What happened in your life to get here? Well, they were like 18, 19, 20, 25. And one after the other started with this. I was born when my mom was young. I never knew my dad. I started kindergarten behind. I couldn't read or write. Many other kids in my class could. I mean, and for me, I said, bingo. This idea of a Family Services Cabinet Council where we focus on starting on teen pregnancy, we should do that. And we should do it for 8 years, and we did. It was the single best thing we did.
Senator,
And what's
that's-
dramatic is that since then, the teen birth rates in Delaware and around the country have gone down by well over 50%.
And so
it
has
really is
the
remarkable.
incidence of abortion. Which
Yes.
is one of the things we
Yeah.
don't focus on. One of the best ways to reduce the demand for abortions is to do a much better job on contraceptives. And the top of the line on contraceptives is IUDs and LARCs.
So, Senator, thank you so much, not just for this interview, but for the great article that you wrote with Andrea and with Belle Sawhill of Brookings. And of course, as you know, we're going to show it at tomorrow's event where we're going to release the journal, and we'll have thousands of people crowding the Brookings Auditorium to
Thousands.
release
Are they thinking of moving it to RFK or
well,
Nat Stadium or
RFK's too old.
probably so?
I think the opening sentence in your article for the chapter shows what I believe most people who are interested in evidence-based policy would want policymakers to say. And here's exactly what you say. A growing number of policymakers and program leaders at the federal, state, and community level are committed to using unbiased evidence to guide them in solving tough social problems. I know that you've done that throughout your career, and we can only hope that more policymakers will do the same thing.
From your lips to God's ears.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.